My name is Noah, 23M, and for most of my life I've been told two things by my parents, Patrick and Lillian. Family appearances matter more than anything, and don't expect too much from us, because we're busy with Julian. Julian is my younger brother, 20M, and in my parents' eyes he has always been the golden beacon of our family. Everything revolved around him. His games, his interests, his mediocre achievements that somehow got celebrated like they were world records. Meanwhile, my accomplishments were treated like background noise. If I won an academic award, my mom would smile faintly and say, "That's nice, Noah, but Julian had a great soccer practice today. He scored twice." If I got a scholarship, my dad would pat me on the shoulder and ask if I could help Julian with his math homework because, and I quote, "He has more potential if he can just get through the basics." I learned early on that any excitement I felt about my own milestones would be short-lived. Still, I kept working hard. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could make it on my own terms. Graduation was supposed to be different. A few weeks before the ceremony, my mom called me, and for once, she sounded genuinely invested. She went on about how proud they were, how they had reserved the best seats in the front row, and how this was a big family moment. She even said she'd ordered a new dress just for the occasion. My dad chimed in during that call too, promising that they'd bring flowers and that Julian would be cheering the loudest. I didn't fully believe them, but part of me wanted to. After all, it was a milestone I'd been chasing for years, late nights studying, holding down internships, and pushing myself while working part-time jobs they never acknowledged. Maybe, I thought, just maybe, they'd finally show up for me the way they always showed up for Julian. The night before graduation, I barely slept. I laid out my gown, polished my shoes, and checked my alarm 3 times. I kept replaying the idea of walking across that stage, hearing my parents clap, maybe even seeing my mom tear up. The morning of the ceremony, the campus was buzzing. Students in gowns clustered together for photos, some with proud parents holding signs and bouquets. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter, nervous chatter, and camera flashes. I scanned the crowd for my family. No sign of them yet, but I told myself they might just be running late. It wasn't unusual. They were the type to keep people waiting. My best friend Adrian, 23M, spotted me near the procession line. His parents were already in their seats, waving enthusiastically, his mom holding a handmade sign with glittery letters spelling out his name. Adrian clapped me on the back and asked, "You see your folks yet?" I shook my head. "Not yet, but they'll be in the front row." "Good," he said, grinning. "You deserve to have them see this." The ceremony began with the usual speeches from the faculty. Applause echoed every few minutes as names were called and students crossed the stage. Families hooped and hollered, standing up to wave or snap pictures. Each time, the joy radiated off the stage and into the audience. Then came my turn. Noah Carter. I stood, smoothed down my gown, and walked across the stage. My heart pounded, not from nerves, but from anticipation. I lifted my eyes toward the front row, those reserved seats my parents made such a big deal about. Empty. Completely empty. No mom. No dad. No Julian. No flowers. Not even a jacket draped across a chair to suggest they'd stepped away. The applause that followed my name was polite, generic. No loud cheer, no proud voices rising above the rest. Just the hollow clapping of strangers. I clenched my jaw and kept walking, determined not to let my face betray what I was feeling. When I reached the chancellor, he handed me my diploma case, but it was heavier than I expected. He paused, looked at me intently, and said softly, "You'll want to open this later." I blinked, caught off guard, but before I could respond, the next name was called and I was ushered forward. The rest of the ceremony blurred. I barely registered the speeches or the laughter echoing from families celebrating together. My eyes kept flicking back to the front row, those empty seats like a spotlight on everything I had always known. To my parents, I was never the priority. When it was finally over, Adrian's family pulled me into their photos, insisting I stand with them. His mom even hugged me and whispered, "We're proud of you too, Noah." I smiled, but inside, I felt hollow. I checked my phone as I walked back toward the dorms. Notifications flooded the screen, message after message after message. My parents. Dozens of them. By the time I scrolled through, the count hit 72. They weren't apologies. They weren't explanations. They were demands. What was in that folder? Why did the chancellor single you out? Did you go behind our backs? You'd better not embarrass this family. Julian deserves to know too. What did you do? I sat on my dorm bed, folder on my lap, phone buzzing nonstop beside me. Every vibration was another text from my parents, and I couldn't even scroll through them all without feeling my hands shake a little. There were messages from my mom, short and frantic. Noah, answer me. Julian needs to know. You can't ignore this. It's inappropriate. My dad's texts were different, sharp and clipped, full of accusations. Explain yourself immediately. This is highly irregular. You've gone too far. Do not embarrass the family name. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room and ignore them entirely, but another part, the part that had spent so long under their scrutiny, felt this awful pull, like a tide dragging me back into the chaos I had been trying to escape. I opened the folder. Inside were several items. A thick packet of documents with my name and student ID stamped on every page. A small sealed envelope marked confidential. A letter from the chancellor himself, typed and signed, praising me for exemplary leadership, initiative, and contributions to the university community. I stared at the letter. It wasn't just a standard graduation note. The chancellor had detailed how I had gone above and beyond in my studies, how my projects had impacted the university, and how my independent initiative had set a new standard for students in my program. And tucked in that packet of documents were letters of recommendation, scholarship awards, and certificates of recognition from committees I hadn't even realized existed. I couldn't help a small, almost guilty smile. After years of being overlooked at home, here was tangible proof that I had mattered somewhere. Somewhere I had worked and earned everything myself. Then I saw the small sealed envelope. Curiosity gnawed at me. I tore it open carefully and found a check. A check for a significant sum of money, along with a typed note. In recognition of your extraordinary achievement and as seed funding for your future endeavors. Use it wisely. I blinked. A legitimate, substantial reward for my work. The folder, it seemed, wasn't just recognition. It was an acknowledgement that I had earned something entirely on my own. And suddenly, the reality of my parents' behavior hit me harder than ever. They hadn't shown up. They hadn't celebrated me. They hadn't even acknowledged my accomplishments beyond lip service. And yet here was an institution, a stranger in my life, validating every late night, every sacrifice, every moment I'd spent pushing myself while they minimized me. The phone buzzed again. 72 messages now, most within minutes of each other. I stared at them, hands shaking slightly. Some were panicked, others accusatory, and a few downright demanding. Julian deserves to know what this is. You've been hiding things. We've reserved your life for the family name. How dare you make decisions without consulting us? Do not think you can bypass us. You will answer for this. The chancellor's office will contact us if necessary. You're out of line. I realized then that for them, it wasn't about my achievements. It wasn't even about Julian. It was about control. All these years, they had held the reins over every success, every failure, every choice I made. And now, for the first time, something was mine, unquestionably mine, and they couldn't handle it. I spent hours just sitting there, scrolling through the messages and rereading the folder. The more I read, the more the anger inside me solidified, not a boiling rage, but a cold, simmering awareness. They weren't going to stop. They couldn't. And if I reacted the wrong way, I would be pulled back into the drama, guilt, and manipulation that had defined my life. I decided to step outside. I needed air, space to think. The campus was quiet by the late afternoon, and I walked through the quad, feeling the sun warm my face. Students milled about, laughing and chatting, families carrying flowers and cameras. I felt disconnected, like I was both part of this world and completely outside it. And then, almost instinctively, I pulled out my phone to review the messages again. One stood out, a voice message from my mom. I hesitated, then pressed play. Noah, you don't understand. You can't just take this and act like you don't need us. Everything you have, everything you've done, it reflects on the family. Julian, he looks up to you, and you're setting a dangerous precedent. You've gone behind our backs, and we won't stand for it. Her voice trembled, but it wasn't genuine emotion. It was fear and control, the classic mix my parents always used to manipulate me. Fear of shame, fear of losing the image they wanted the world to see. I pressed stop. And that was it. I knew then I couldn't let them dictate anything about what came next. For years, they had made me feel small, unimportant, and invisible. For years, they had set rules that only applied to me, overlooked Julian's mistakes, and treated my life like an extension of their vanity. Now, the power dynamics were shifting. Over the next few days, the messages escalated. They went from demanding explanations to full-blown threats. "This family will not be embarrassed," Patrick typed one morning, adding, "You will not squander the opportunities we've provided." Lillian's messages were more emotional, claiming I was betraying the family and showing disrespect by not involving them. I realized they didn't even know the half of it. They had no idea that the folder contained proof that I could stand alone, that I had made a mark without their interference. And Julian? He didn't know either. I thought about him for a moment. He was a byproduct of their favoritism, a pawn in their relentless need to dominate my life. I decided to call Adrian for support. He picked up immediately, cheerful as always. "So, how's it feel to be a graduate?" I exhaled, trying to keep my tone steady. "Exhilarating, terrifying, exhausting. And the worst part? My parents are losing their minds. 72 messages in less than a day. I don't know what to do." Adrian whistled. 72? That's insane. They really didn't show up. No, not a single person. The front row, reserved for us, completely empty. And now they're threatening me, demanding answers, claiming I've gone behind their backs. "Wow," he said slowly. "Honestly, Noah, I'm not surprised. You've always been the one they tried to control. But now, you actually have proof that you don't need them. Maybe it's time to use it." I didn't respond immediately. I just sat there, holding the folder, staring out the window. The weight of it in my hands felt symbolic, like the first real evidence that I could reclaim my life from them. And deep down, a plan started to form. A slow, careful, deliberate plan. Over the next week, the messages kept coming, each one more frantic than the last. They demanded meetings, explanations, and even tried to reach the chancellor's office, calling my school to demand answers. Their attempts to assert control were frantic, almost hysterical. I realized something chilling. They weren't worried about me, or my accomplishments, or even Julian. They were worried about losing their control over me. And now, for the first time, they couldn't dictate the narrative. By the second week, the calls and messages had become a constant hum in the background. I had started organizing my thoughts, writing down everything I'd accomplished, everything they'd ignored, every slight, every dismissive remark, every time they had tried to make me feel invisible. And that's when I began to realize the full scope of what I could do. I could confront them. I could show them exactly what they had been denying me. And I could do it in a way they wouldn't see coming. The folder had changed everything. It wasn't just proof of my achievements. It was leverage. And I intended to use it. The next day, I made the first move in what would become the most important confrontation of my life. I called the university's administrative office under the pretext of needing clarification on some procedural questions about alumni benefits. What I really wanted was a record of all my awards, letters of recognition, and correspondence. Anything that could serve as irrefutable proof of what I had accomplished. While I waited on hold, I thought about the years I had spent tiptoeing around their egos, trying not to upset them, trying not to challenge the household hierarchy. For the first time, I didn't feel obligated to protect their image. I felt free, and in the back of my mind, a single thought kept echoing. They would regret thinking they could ignore me forever. Over the next few days, I worked quietly, methodically, like someone assembling pieces of a puzzle that only I could see. I reviewed every document in that folder repeatedly, cross-referencing letters of recognition with emails, scholarships, awards, and internship achievements. The more I examined it, the more obvious it became. This was a record of a life my parents had refused to acknowledge. Everything I had earned on my own, every ounce of effort, meticulously documented. I decided to start small. My parents were trying to control the narrative, sending messages that demanded explanations as if my success was theirs to interpret. I drafted a single response, a short, formal email. "Noah, you must answer us now," my dad's message read. I ignored it. The next morning, I sent a carefully worded reply, not defensive, not emotional, but firm and undeniable. I attached copies of several letters from the chancellor, scholarship awards, and recognition for my projects. "Dear Mom and Dad," I typed, my fingers steady. For years, I have been told that my accomplishments are secondary. Here is documented proof of my work, acknowledged by those who evaluate merit objectively. I have achieved all of this independently. I hope this clarifies my position. I hit send and immediately felt a weight lift. I had given them the truth, not in words or explanations, but in facts. Facts they could not twist. The response was immediate and furious. 72 messages turned into more than 100, many unreadable in their frantic, disjointed nature. Lillian's messages accused me of shaming the family in front of the university, while Patrick demanded I retract everything and acknowledge their role. There was a tone I had never seen before, panic mixed with entitlement. They couldn't believe that for once, I had seized control. I didn't respond. I let it simmer. That weekend, I decided to take a risk. I had quietly reserved a small meeting room at the university library under the guise of meeting with an advisor about alumni resources. In reality, I printed everything from my folder, extra copies of letters, emails, and certificates, and organized them in neat stacks. I knew this would be the turning point, the moment I could finally confront them with irrefutable evidence of my independence. I called my parents, deliberately vague, inviting them to a meeting on campus. "Why would we come?" Patrick asked, suspicion lacing his voice. "It's important," I replied evenly. "It concerns your role in my achievements." There was a pause. "Very well," Lillian said finally. "We will come." By the time they arrived, I was already waiting in the library room, calmly setting out the papers in front of me. Julian trailed behind, fidgeting nervously, clearly aware something was off, but not understanding why. They stepped in, looking confident at first. Patrick's shoulders were squared, his expression a mask of authority. Lillian held her purse tightly, trying to appear composed. Julian, of course, tried to appear interested, but he kept glancing at his phone. I gestured for them to sit. "Please, everyone have a seat." Patrick scoffed. "What is this, Noah? Some kind of joke?" I didn't answer immediately. I pulled the folder toward me and opened it carefully. I slid the chancellor's letter across the table. "Read this," I said calmly. "Every word is verifiable. Every award, every recognition, every project I did on my own." Lillian's eyes narrowed. "This is absurd. We have supported you, provided for you, everything you have." I didn't flinch. "You provided nothing of substance. You provided control and judgment. Every step of the way, you minimized me, compared me to Julian, and insisted that my life existed to support the image you wanted. And now, I am showing you what your child can do independently." Patrick's face turned red. "Do you realize what you are implying?" "I'm implying that for years, you prioritized Julian's mediocre achievements over my consistent effort. I'm implying that I don't need your validation anymore. I'm implying that you cannot manipulate or shame me into obedience." Julian shifted uncomfortably. "Noah, maybe this isn't the time." I cut him off. "It's exactly the time, Julian. You are complicit in their favoritism, whether you realize it or not. But this is not about you. This is about me finally reclaiming control over my own life." I slid the envelope with the check across the table. "This is a tangible recognition of my work. Not yours. Not theirs. Mine. And the university has documented everything I've done, so any attempt to claim credit is impossible." Lillian's hands trembled. You can't do this," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "I already have," I said. "And now it's on the record. Every email, every certificate, every award. They're all here, all verified. This isn't open to debate." Patrick slammed his hand on the table. "This is disgraceful. You are humiliating us." "I am not humiliating you," I replied evenly. "You have humiliated me my entire life. I am finally asserting my independence. And if you continue to try to control or intimidate me, it will only make this worse for you." Lillian opened her mouth, then closed it. Patrick's jaw tightened. Julian looked confused, caught between loyalty to his parents and the realization that I had always been sidelined. I leaned back slightly, letting the tension settle. "For the first time in my life," I said softly, "I am standing on my own. Everything in this folder proves it. And nothing you do can change that." Patrick and Lillian exchanged a glance. It wasn't the confident look they arrived with. It was fear. Real, unmasked fear. For decades, they had believed they could manipulate me. For decades, they had thought control was theirs by default. Now, they were powerless. Julian finally spoke, quietly. "Noah, I I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Julian, I replied. Just listen and understand. And maybe, finally, you'll see what I've been dealing with all these years. The room was thick with tension. Patrick's fingers twitched on the table. Lillian's face was pale. Julian looked smaller than his usual confident self. I sat back, holding the folder deliberately, letting them feel the weight of what I had achieved without them. And then, Patrick's voice cut through, sharp and cold. You think you've won, Noah? This changes nothing. You will answer for this. We will not let this go. The family name. I raised a hand, cutting him off. The family name is irrelevant when it's been used as a weapon to control me my entire life. From now on, I make my own rules. There was a pause. Lillian's lips trembled as she opened her mouth to respond, but I could see she didn't know what to say. Patrick's face twisted in frustration, his attempts to assert authority crumbling under the undeniable facts before him. The days after that confrontation were some of the quietest, and yet most charged, I had experienced in years. Patrick and Lillian retreated into their predictable patterns, a flurry of calls and texts that I ignored, sudden social media posts subtly hinting at family disappointment, without ever naming me, and even attempts to involve Julian in their schemes. I watched it all carefully, cataloging their every move. I realized they had no intention of truly apologizing or acknowledging my accomplishments. They wanted control, validation, and appearances. I decided to escalate, but in a way that forced them to confront facts they couldn't spin. First, I leveraged the university's alumni office. I contacted them under the pretext of gathering information for a potential leadership seminar. I requested official documentation for every award, letter of recommendation, and scholarship I had ever received, including notes from professors and advisors praising my independent initiative. The staff, professional and impartial, sent me comprehensive records within days. I printed everything, organized it meticulously, and created a portfolio that left no room for denial or interpretation. I also made digital copies, formatted to highlight dates, endorsements, and quantifiable achievements. This wasn't just a paper trail, it was a fortress of evidence. And I knew exactly how to use it. The first opportunity came when Patrick called, furious as ever. Noah, answer me now, he barked. We demand explanations. You cannot continue to act without consulting us. You've embarrassed us, and this needs to be corrected immediately. I stayed calm, deliberately pacing in my apartment. Patrick, everything you're upset about is documented in my portfolio. Every achievement, every award, every recognition. You are welcome to review it yourself. There was silence on the line, then a sharp, incredulous laugh. Do you think this absolves you? This paper, changes nothing. We have provided for you, raised you. Provided for me? I interrupted, voice measured. Do you call favoritism, constant belittling, and denial of recognition providing? The university has provided validation for my work. I didn't need you to sign off on it, and it's undeniable. Patrick slammed his fist on something audible through the phone. You will regret this. I hung up calmly. Let them simmer. Their threats, as hollow as they had always been, were no longer frightening. Over the next week, I started planting small, deliberate reminders of my accomplishments where they could not ignore them. I posted an announcement on a professional networking site, highlighting my graduation honors, leadership awards, and independent projects. No names of family were included, just facts. I knew it would reach Patrick and Lillian eventually. They monitored my online presence obsessively. As predicted, the messages started again, even more frantic this time. Lillian sent paragraphs, half coherent in their desperation. Noah, you cannot do this to us. You have humiliated the family in public. You are making Julian question everything. How could you betray us like this? Julian, predictably, got caught in the middle. He sent me a hesitant message, trying to justify their behavior. I don't know why they're reacting this way. You're being extreme, Noah. Can't you just? I didn't respond to Julian. He wasn't the problem. Patrick and Lillian were. Julian had been raised to be their favorite, conditioned to believe the world owed him attention and praise. That was his upbringing, not his crime. I spent the next few days planning the next stage. I realized that subtlety was key. My parents thrived on public appearances and image. If I could expose the truth in a way that undermined that image, it would hit harder than any confrontation. First, I contacted the alumni office to organize a feature in the university's newsletter, highlighting outstanding graduates. I submitted my portfolio, including detailed notes and photos from my projects, letters from professors, and scholarship confirmations. The submission was factual, professional, and impossible to twist. By design, it included a section comparing student leadership initiatives, highlighting measurable impact. Every accolade I had achieved independently of my family's interference was emphasized. Meanwhile, I continued documenting my parents' reactions. Their frantic texts and calls were saved, cataloged, and organized by date and intensity. I even kept screenshots of subtle threats and manipulations, comments about Julian needing guidance, veiled accusations of me acting selfishly, and repeated attempts to assert control. The evidence was undeniable. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. A small, local news outlet covering graduation success stories reached out, asking if I would be willing to provide details about my projects and achievements. I agreed, framing my contributions objectively, without exaggeration, but including personal commentary on independent initiative and leadership. The article ran quietly, but Patrick and Lillian found it almost immediately. Their reactions were explosive. Messages flooded my phone, this time with a new edge. "You have crossed a line, no?" Patrick wrote. "This is public humiliation. You cannot continue to embarrass us like this. You are turning the world against your family." Lillian added in a separate text, her tone trembling but frantic. "Do you realize what you are doing?" I stared at my phone and smiled faintly. For years, they had tried to convince me that my achievements were worthless if not approved by them. For years, they had minimized, belittled, and controlled me. And now, for the first time, the truth was undeniable. I wasn't embarrassed. They were. By the end of that week, I had formal documentation in hand, public recognition, and a meticulously organized portfolio. Everything they claimed to control, the family narrative, Julian's perception, their public image, was now under scrutiny. I realized that the final step would be deliberate confrontation, a scenario where every threat, every accusation, and every attempt at manipulation could be countered with clear evidence. It was not enough to simply win. I needed them to understand the scale of their misjudgment. Patrick and Lillian had spent decades believing control was theirs by default, that I would always bow, defer, and remain a background actor in their family narrative. But I had shifted the power, and now, I intended to ensure they could never underestimate me again. I set the folder on my desk, organized the letters and awards into a precise sequence, and began writing a timeline. Every slight, every dismissal, every attempt at manipulation over the years was cataloged. Each entry included dates, evidence, and notes on their behavior. I knew that when the confrontation came, nothing could be disputed, and I realized something else. This wasn't just about me reclaiming my life. This was about teaching them a lesson in respect, control, and consequences. Patrick and Lillian had spent years shaping a household where appearances mattered more than reality, where favoritism was normalized, and where I had been systematically devalued. I intended to dismantle that perception carefully, methodically, and without leaving room for their excuses. When I looked at Julian, I understood he was collateral, an unintentional participant in their manipulations. He didn't fully comprehend the stakes yet, but he would. And when he did, I wanted the realization to be undeniable. The folder on my desk seemed almost symbolic now, a weight of truth, a record of achievements they could not dismiss, and a tool for the reckoning that was about to unfold. And I knew the next move had to be precise. Any misstep, and they would regroup, gaslight, and continue their attempts to dominate my life. But this time, I was ready. For the first time, I had everything I needed: evidence, validation, and the clarity to confront them without hesitation. The day of the confrontation arrived. I invited them to a formal meeting, not at my apartment, not at the library, but at a neutral location, a small conference room at the university. I arranged it professionally, sending a polite email stating it was regarding clarification of achievements and family participation in alumni initiatives. I wanted it to feel official, irrefutable. When Patrick and Lillian arrived, they were confident at first, wearing their usual armor of entitlement and control. But as soon as I laid out the portfolio, printed copies of emails, letters, and certificates, the initial smugness began to crack. I watched their expressions shift, first disbelief, then panic, and finally a deep, unsettling realization that they had miscalculated. For decades, they had assumed I would remain under their thumb. For decades, they had assumed control was absolute. Now, it was clear that for the first time, I was unassailable. And as I slid the sealed envelope with the check across the table, I saw the truth in their eyes. They had underestimated me. Patrick's jaw tightened. Lillian's hands trembled. Julian looked shocked, caught between loyalty and the undeniable reality. After the meeting at the university, I knew I had to take the next steps carefully. It wasn't enough for Patrick and Lillian to be confronted privately. I needed the world to see the reality of their behavior, and I needed Julian to understand what had been happening all these years. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Every email, every award, every recognition from the university and my internships was meticulously organized into a digital portfolio, with physical copies ready for anyone who doubted my story. I wrote a detailed letter outlining the timeline of their manipulation, favoritism, and outright dismissals. I included screenshots of messages, copies of letters, and a narrative of my accomplishments. I wanted it to be impossible for them to twist the facts. Then, I arranged a small gathering at the University Alumni Center. Invitations went to close family friends, a few professors, and key figures from my program who had witnessed my work firsthand. I deliberately did not invite my parents. I wanted them to watch what they had always tried to control, the family image, crumble without them having a chance to preempt it. On the day of the gathering, I arrived early. The room was set formally, my achievements displayed on tables, printed awards arranged chronologically, and framed certificates lining the walls. As guests arrived, professors and friends alike offered congratulations, commenting on how impressive the portfolio was. Their reactions were genuine, untainted by manipulation. About 30 minutes into the gathering, Patrick and Lillian arrived. Julian followed reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable. The moment they stepped in, the atmosphere shifted. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at them. I stepped forward, holding the digital portfolio in my hands. "I'm glad you could make it," I said evenly. "This gathering is to celebrate what I have accomplished independently, without interference or control. I want everyone here to understand the full scope of my work, the dedication it took, and the years of being minimized that led up to this moment." Patrick's lips pressed into a thin line. Lillian's eyes darted nervously, scanning the room. Julian avoided my gaze entirely. I displayed the awards, letters of recognition, and scholarship confirmations. "Each of these," I said, pointing to the documents, "represents work that was accomplished entirely on my own. Every time you told me I was secondary to Julian, every time you compared me to him, every time you tried to assert control over my choices, it's all here. Documented, verified, undeniable." A few professors nodded, offering supportive murmurs. Friends whispered about how thorough the portfolio was, how obvious it was that I had achieved all of this without any help from my parents. Lillian finally spoke, her voice wavering. "Noah, this isn't necessary. We raised you, we provided." I held up a hand. "You provided nothing but judgment, favoritism, and control. You have consistently tried to shape my life to suit your image, while denying me the recognition and respect I earned." Patrick slammed his hand against the table. "You will regret this. You are humiliating this family in front of everyone." I calmly turned to the assembled guests. "I am not humiliating my family. I am presenting the truth. If showing the reality of their actions is uncomfortable for them, that is a consequence of their choices, not mine." Julian finally spoke, his voice small and uncertain. "Noah, I didn't realize. I didn't know it was this bad." "I know," I said quietly. "It wasn't your responsibility to know. But now, you see what years of favoritism and manipulation can do. And you see that it doesn't have to define me." Patrick's face was red now, anger and panic mingling. Lillian's hands shook. "This is unacceptable. You have gone too far," she exclaimed, but her words rang hollow. I smiled faintly, not with joy, but with calm satisfaction. "No, this is exactly where I needed to be. Independent, recognized, and finally unafraid of your judgment or control." The room stayed tense for a moment longer, then professors and friends resumed their conversations quietly, acknowledging my achievements, while my parents were left standing there, exposed, powerless, and furious. Julian quietly stepped away, no doubt trying to process everything. After the event, Patrick and Lillian sent another wave of messages, but I ignored them. They realized, finally, that their influence over my life had ended. The portfolio, the public acknowledgement, and my carefully documented history left them no room to manipulate or twist reality. In the weeks that followed, I moved forward with opportunities that had been available to me because of my independent accomplishments: an invitation to a graduate program, a leadership role in a professional organization, and offers from companies impressed by my record. Julian distanced himself slightly, confused and unsettled, perhaps realizing the scale of favoritism he had benefited from. My parents attempted to salvage their image through friends and family, subtly trying to spin stories of family disagreements. But anyone who had seen the graduation event or the documentation knew the truth. Patrick and Lillian's entitlement, obsession with control, and blatant favoritism were exposed. They were left with only the shell of authority they had once wielded, powerless to undo the consequences of their own behavior. I, on the other hand, was free. Free to live my life on my terms, free to pursue my goals without interference, and free to build relationships based on respect rather than obligation. I had finally reclaimed my autonomy, and the victory wasn't just personal. It was undeniable, public, and permanent. As for my family, the dynamic had shifted irreversibly. Patrick and Lillian could no longer assert authority, and Julian began to see the cracks in the narrative they had always presented. The lesson was clear: underestimating me, attempting to control me, and prioritizing appearances over truth had consequences. They had been villains in my life for decades, and now the story had been rewritten, without their permission and without forgiveness. I kept the folder, the portfolio, and the digital records close, not out of bitterness, but as a testament to the truth, to my resilience, and to the fact that even the most entrenched control can be dismantled with patience, evidence, and resolve. And in the quiet moments, when I looked back at the years of manipulation, favoritism, and gaslighting, I felt a sense of calm satisfaction. The chapter was closed. I had won. And for the first time in my life, my accomplishments were truly my own. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.